In a dust-choked border town, two Apache sisters were sold like cattle beneath the jeers of strangers. But from the crowd stepped one man, silent, widowed, scarred, who placed his silver not for ownership, but for something far deeper. That night, he told them only this: "I'll take you home." The town smelled of dust and sweat, a bitter perfume that clung to the wooden beams of the auction block. Wagons rattled in the square, their wheels groaning under crates of feed, lumber, and salt pork. But the real commerce that day was flesh. Sunlight struck hard against the packed earth, laying bare every crease in the faces of the settlers who gathered, voices murmuring low, eyes hungry for spectacle. Two sisters stood bound at the center, wrists tied, hair unkempt but still braided, with care as if to hold on to dignity. Ada the elder carried herself with a taut stillness, her dark eyes flat and watchful. Nayeli, younger by a handful of years, clutched her sister's arm as if touch alone might anchor her in the storm of jeers and appraising stares. They had been herded here like cattle, their fates spoken of in coin and spit. The auctioneer barked. In a voice worn raw from years of shouting, his hat tipped back, his words cruelly casual. "Two for the taking, strong backs young enough to serve. Who'll start the bid?" The crowd shifted, weighing, measuring, some with laughter in their throats, others with scorn. To them, the sisters were neither women nor human, only property waiting for hands to claim. Then came a silence, small but heavy, as a lone figure stepped from the edge of the crowd. He was tall but not imposing, shoulders stooped slightly as though carrying years upon them. His beard was streaked with gray, his eyes deep-set, marked by shadows of sleepless nights. Samuel Carver, a rancher known to few and spoken of less, moved with the gait of a man who had buried more than he could carry. His boots struck the dust, steady, unhurried. He did not glance at the crowd. His gaze rested only once upon the sisters, just long enough for something unspoken to pass between him and Ada. She lifted her chin, defiant in the face of every insult hurled that day. Something in her composure, something in Nayeli's trembling grip, struck a place inside Samuel that had long been hollow. The bidding began with crude laughter. A man in a stained vest offered a sum, another doubled it with a sneer. Samuel said nothing until the price rose to mockery. Then in a voice quiet yet carrying, he named his number. The air shifted. The men who had jeered fell silent, measuring the stranger who offered not with mirth but with the weight of finality. No one countered. The gavel struck wood, sharp as a rifle crack. Sold. The crowd dispersed in murmurs. Some cursed, others shrugged. Samuel stepped forward, placed the coins in the auctioneer's palm, and without ceremony cut the ropes from the sisters' wrists. For a brief moment, Ada rubbed the raw skin where rope had bitten, her eyes never leaving the man before her. Nayeli kept close, unsure whether to fear or trust this sudden shift in fate. They followed him through the thinning crowd, past the saloon doors that swung with drunken laughter, past children chasing each other through the dust. The town faded behind them, swallowed by the open land where sky stretched vast and indifferent. The ride to his ranch was long and wordless. Samuel led his horse, the sisters walking beside him. The land rolled out in muted colors, sagebrush bending in the wind, distant mountains veiled in haze. Crows circled above, their cries sharp against the silence. Ada's steps were even, her strength quiet but evident. Nayeli stumbled at times, but Samuel neither hurried nor offered comfort. His presence was like the land itself, solid, weathered, unreadable. By dusk they reached the ranch. It was not grand. A clapboard house with shutters askew, a barn leaning with age, fences needing mending. The yard was littered with the tools of a life half-kept, an axe sunk into a block of wood, a broken plow left to rust. Yet the place carried a gravity, the mark of someone who had labored here with stubborn persistence. Samuel opened the door and let them enter first. The house smelled faintly of old cedar and long-cooled ashes. Shadows stretched across the walls, broken only by the dim glow of a hearth fire barely clinging to life. Against one wall stood a rocking chair, motionless but worn smooth by years of use. A shawl hung from a peg by the door, its edges frayed but carefully folded, untouched for seasons. The sisters exchanged a glance, their silence carrying questions neither dared voice. Was this another prison? Another man's dominion? Samuel fetched bread, hard from keeping, and set it on the table beside a pot of black coffee. He slid 2 blankets across the wood, his movements plain, without ceremony. You'll rest here. Tonight, he said, his voice low and rough from disuse. No promises, no explanations, only the faint creak of the chair as he settled into it, eyes fixed not on them but on the fire's waning glow. Ada guided Nayeli to the hearth, spreading the blanket across her shoulders. They ate little, drank less. Hunger warred with caution. The flames snapped weakly, casting their faces in gold and shadow. The house, though shelter, felt cold with the absence of warmth that had once lived within its walls. Samuel did not watch them, yet he was keenly aware of their presence. The sound of their breath, the rustle of the blanket, the quiet hum of words in a tongue not his own. He remembered nights long ago when another voice had filled this room, laughter light as rain. The shawl by the door seemed to breathe with memory. He closed his eyes against it, gripping the arm of the chair until his knuckles whitened. The sisters lay near the fire, Ada awake long after Nayeli's breathing slowed into the rhythm of sleep. Her gaze lingered on the man who had taken them from the crowd. He had not touched them, not spoken harshly, not demanded anything. Yet the question burned. Had they escaped one cruelty only to enter another, more subtle kind? Outside, the wind combed the dry grass, rattling the shutters. The land stretched endless and silent beneath the stars, holding its secrets. Within the walls, 3 souls lay in uneasy company, bound not by choice but by the strange currents of fate. The fire sank lower, sparks drifting upward like prayers into smoke. In its fading light, the outlines of scars, on wrists, on hearts, on memory, remained visible, even in silence. And so the night held them, strangers beneath one roof, caught between abandonment and the faintest, most fragile shadow of shelter. Morning came pale over the plains, the light thin and reluctant as though unwilling to disturb the silence of the house. Samuel rose early, as he always had, his boots sounding across the wooden floor like an old ritual. He tended the fire, drank his coffee in solitude, and stepped outside to face the land that asked everything yet gave so little in return. The sisters stirred only after he was gone. Ada wrapped Nayeli's shoulders in her blanket, combing her hair with steady fingers, untangling knots with patience learned from years of care. When the braids were tied, tight and neat, the younger sister seemed steadier, as though the strands themselves held back the chaos of memory. They spoke in their own tongue, whispers too soft to carry beyond the hearth. Their words were not. For Samuel, though he caught the cadence of them, and it pricked his ears like half-remembered music. The ranch was a place of work, and Samuel threw himself into it with a stubbornness born from habit. He mended fences that had sagged in the wind, hammered nails into boards where time had split them, and drove the cattle from one stretch of pasture to another. His hands bore the map of a lifetime of labor, scarred, strong, and unwilling to be still. Yet every movement was haunted. The creak of the fence post called forth the memory of another hand passing him tools, laughter in the sun, a shawl tossed over shoulders as chores were finished together. Inside, Ada watched the way dust sifted down the beams, how the rocking chair in the corner never moved except when a stray draft nudged it. She thought of her own losses, a husband who had fallen to bullets, a home burned to nothing but ash. She carried her grief in silence, for silence had long been her shield. Still, the presence of the man who had bought their freedom, or their fartim, captivity depending on the day, unsettled her. His quiet was not cruel, not demanding. It was the quiet of someone carrying his own grave within. Nayeli, though younger, had seen enough to learn when to fear and when to hope. She smiled less than she once had, her voice often faltering before words could form. But when Samuel left tools near the hearth, an old knife sharpened, a worn shawl stitched at its frayed corner. She noticed. And when Ada mended one of his shirts, leaving it folded on the chair by the door, she noticed his eyes pause upon it before he picked it up without a word. The days took on a rhythm, fragile yet undeniable. Samuel ate at the table alone, but returned to find bread baked or beans simmering on the stove. He stacked firewood outside, only to see it doubled by the sisters' effort the next morning. The exchange was never spoken of. Gratitude was carved into action, not words. At night, the hearth grew brighter, fed by hands other than his. The sisters sat close to the fire, Ada braiding Nayeli's hair with slow care, each braid an act of remembrance, of refusing to let captivity strip them of themselves. Samuel sometimes lingered at the table, his eyes drawn to the shifting glow of the flames. He did not join them, but neither did he retreat. The firelight cast his shadow long across the floor, a companion to theirs, and though none acknowledged it, the room seemed less hollow. The ghosts, however, did not vanish. Samuel's eyes often strayed to the shawl still hanging near the door, untouched since his wife had folded it there before her last illness carried her to the grave. At times he thought he heard her voice in the whisper of the wind, or the creak of the rocker when no one sat in it. He kept those hauntings to himself, swallowing them with black coffee and silence. Ada carried her own ghosts. In the quiet, she felt again the grip of rough hands, the jeers of men who saw her people as spoils of conquest. She bore scars not visible, but carved deep into memory. At night she dreamt of her husband's final cry, of fire consuming the place she once called home. Yet in the mornings she braided Nayeli's hair as though each plait might stitch a measure of safety back into their lives. Nayeli hid her hurts behind watchfulness. She lingered near windows, watching the horizon, listening for hoofbeats that might mean danger returned. But she also began to watch Samuel, not with trust but with the wary hope of someone gauging whether a storm would break again. When he handed her a cup of coffee, steaming and bitter, she accepted it with a nod, her fingers brushing the roughness of his hand for a heartbeat before retreating. The season edged toward colder winds. Frost clung to the grass in the mornings, and the nights grew longer, their silence filled with the crackle of firewood. Samuel repaired an old shawl, its fabric coarse but warm, and left it folded on the chair by the hearth. Ada found it there, touched the stitching with her fingers, and without a word, draped it across her shoulders. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt the faintest thread of dignity returned. That night, as Nayeli hummed an old tune, Ada caught Samuel's eyes across the fire. Neither spoke, yet something in his gaze told her he too knew what it was to lose, to wander among shadows with no promise of light. The house, once hollow with grief, began to stir again. The fire burned brighter. The rocking chair shifted when someone passed. The table bore the marks of meals eaten together even if silence ruled over them. What had been a tomb was breathing, though faintly, like embers coaxed back toward flame. And though none dared admit it, each of them, widower, widow, sister, felt the thread that bound them tightening, unseen but undeniable, weaving them into something that might one day be called family. The wind rose without warning, sweeping over the plains with a voice like mourning. Clouds gathered in the west, black and bruised, rolling fast as cavalry over the horizon. Samuel knew the signs. He drove the last of the cattle toward shelter, his coat pulled tight, hat pressed against his brow. By the time he returned to the house, the first sheets of rain were already striking the earth, fierce and slanting. The sisters were at the hearth when he entered, Ada tending the fire, Nayeli braiding strips of cloth for rope. Both looked up, their faces lit in fits of orange glow and sudden shadow. Thunder cracked, shaking the walls. The storm was not passing, it had come to settle. Samuel checked the shutters, nailed one closed where the wind had torn it loose. Then came another sound, sharp and out of place, the pounding of hooves through mud. Samuel turned. A rider broke from the storm, bent low in the saddle, cloak plastered to his frame by rain. Lightning flared, and in that split second, the man's face was thrown into relief. hard, lean, with eyes quick as knives. He dismounted, with practiced ease, and strode toward the house, leading his horse by the reins. A knock followed, heavy and demanding. Samuel's jaw tightened. Hospitality was law in these parts. No soul could be left to die in a storm. But the law of survival whispered caution. He opened the door all the same. The stranger stepped in, dripping rain onto the floorboards, the smell of wet leather and gunpowder following him like a second skin. His rifle was slung across his back, a revolver heavy at his hip. He nodded, once not in gratitude but expectation. "Storm will kill a man out there," he said, his voice carrying the drawl of one too accustomed to command. Samuel gave a short nod. "Stables out back, fire's here." The man's eyes swept the room. They lingered on Ada and Nayeli. Recognition flickered, cruel, deliberate. A grin curled the edge of his mouth, though it carried no warmth. "Well now," he murmured, "ain't this a surprise?" The sisters stiffened. Nayeli's hand clutched Ada's sleeve, her breath sharp in her throat. Ada's face hardened, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Samuel moved past the stranger, closing the door against the rain. He placed himself near the hearth, not between them outright, but close enough. His old rifle rested against the wall within easy reach. His silence was heavier than words. The storm pressed harder. Rain lashed the windows. Thunder shook the rafters. Inside, firelight threw long, quivering shadows that danced across the stranger's face. He seated himself without invitation, boots scraping the floor. From time to time he cast glances toward the sisters, eyes narrowing with memory, lips twisting, as though recalling private cruelties. "So," he drawled, stretching the word, "looks like fate's tossed us together again. Ain't that something?" Neither Ada nor Nayeli answered. They sat close, shoulders nearly touching, their silence stronger than speech. Ada's braid hung over her shoulder, a dark line against her shawl, a symbol of order in the face of chaos. The stranger's gaze lingered on it, and his grin widened. Samuel said nothing. He poured coffee into a tin cup and placed it before the man. The gesture was mechanical, without welcome. The stranger drank, smirking. "Quiet type, huh? Can't say I mind. Makes it easier to hear myself think." He leaned back, tapping, his fingers on the table, each sound sharp as raindrops against tin. Hours stretched. The storm refused to break, rattling the house like a beast clawing at the walls. Conversation, when it came, was barbed. The stranger asked questions in a mocking tone, where Samuel had found the sisters, how long he meant to keep them, what price he had paid. His words dripped with implication, with taunts meant to unearth shame or provoke anger. Samuel gave no answer beyond what necessity demanded. His silence was a wall, immovable. The rifle remained near, his eyes steady, never flinching. The stranger laughed at that stillness, but his laughter rang hollow in the confines of the storm. Ada kept her eyes on the fire, though her mind drifted to darker memories, faces and nights where men had spoken in that same tone, hands reaching, freedom torn away. Her fingers curled tight against her knees, nails biting flesh, holding her together. Nayeli pressed close, whispering a single word in their tongue, a prayer. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks of the house. Lightning split the sky, throwing the stranger's face into brief, skeletal brilliance. For a moment, Samuel's eyes met Ada's across the fire. In that silence, something unspoken passed, a promise of watchfulness, of a shield raised though no vow had been given. The stranger shifted, restless. He toyed with the handle of his revolver, spinning it with casual menace before setting it down. His grin never faltered, but unease stirred beneath it. Samuel's quiet presence, his refusal to bend or be baited, was its own kind of power. Night deepened. The sisters lay near the hearth, their forms wrapped in blankets, though neither found sleep. Samuel sat in the rocker, its creak faint against the roar of the storm. The stranger dozed lightly at the table, hat pulled low, yet one hand never strayed far from his weapon. The fire burned low, yet it held, casting the room in uneasy light. Rain drummed steady as a war march. Each heartbeat in that small cabin carried the weight of waiting, of dread postponed but not diminished. The storm outside and the storm within were one and the same, wild, unrelenting, dangerous. But Samuel remained unmoved, a figure of silence and shadow, his rifle close, his gaze steady. And though no words were spoken, Ada knew and Naeli felt that this house had become more than walls against rain. It was a place where, for the first time in years, someone stood between them and the storm. The storm did not pass. For 2 more days it clawed at the walls, shrieking through cracks in the shutters, driving rain sideways against the glass until the whole house groaned under its weight. The land outside became a mire, earth torn to mud, sky a roiling bruise that would not heal. And so they remained, 4 souls beneath one roof, circling each other in silence broken only by the storm's relentless voice. The sisters kept near the hearth. Ada's hands were never idle. She mended cloth, braided twine, cleaned tools that were not hers, her body finding purpose even when her heart carried nothing but unrest. Naeli, younger and less guarded, hovered near her sister but watched Samuel with cautious eyes. She had learned too soon that men's silences were dangerous, yet in this man's quiet she sensed not cruelty, but restraint, like a dam holding back a flood. The stranger filled the house with a different energy, restless, prowling. He moved from chair to window to table, boots striking the boards with impatience. He told stories that were half threats, boasting of places he had been, men he had beaten, women he had taken. His words were flung like stones, meant to provoke. Samuel listened but did not reply. He remained steady, tending the fire, whittling wood with an old knife, polishing the rifle that rested always near at hand. The air thickened, not just with smoke, but with something more dangerous. Each glance, each step across the room carried tension. Ada felt it like a string drawn taut, ready to snap. She studied Samuel's posture, the way his shoulders held firm, the way his eyes followed the stranger without haste or fear. It was the stance of a man who had lost much but refused to surrender what remained. Naeli felt something else. When Samuel set a log on the fire, when he passed her a tin cup filled with coffee, when his shadow fell between her and the stranger's gaze, she felt a strange, long-forgotten sense of safety. It unsettled her, for she had lived too long without such shelter. By the second night, the storm had worn them thin. The stranger's grin had sharpened to something crueler, his patience gone. He circled the sisters with questions, mocking their silence, sneering at their language when Ada murmured to Naeli in Apache. His hand strayed often to the knife at his belt, tapping it against the table, letting its glint catch the firelight. Samuel remained immovable. His rifle lay across his knees now, not raised, not aimed, but present. His silence was its own answer, his gaze steady as stone. Each time the stranger pressed too close, Samuel's posture shifted, subtle but undeniable, a wall standing firm. But walls are tested. It happened deep in the night. The storm raged louder than before, wind howling like 1,000 voices. The fire had burned low, its light flickering across the rafters. Samuel sat in the rocker, half in shadow, when the stranger rose suddenly, his grin twisted with drink and spite. His knife flashed as he stepped toward the sisters. Ada pulled Naeli close, her body a shield. But before the knife could descend, Samuel moved. His rifle came up, steady, unshaking, the barrel gleaming in the fire's faint glow. The room froze. The stranger's smile faltered, though his hand still gripped the blade. "Enough," Samuel said, his voice low, gravel deepened by years of silence. One word only, but it carried the weight of judgment. The stranger stared, chest heaving, knife trembling between threat and retreat. Samuel's eyes did not waver. He did not shout, did not curse. His calm was sharper than any rage, his presence more unyielding than the storm outside. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, with a curse, spat through clenched teeth, the stranger lowered the knife. He stepped back, his grin returning, though thinner now, brittle, Didn't mean nothing, he muttered, though all in the room knew the lie of it. Samuel did not lower the rifle. He held it across his knees until the man returned to his seat, until his hand left the blade, until his posture sagged into uneasy rest. Only then did Samuel let out a breath, though his eyes never left the intruder. The sisters huddled together, their hearts pounding, their trust shifting. For the first time, they saw not just a rancher who had claimed them from an auction block, but a man who would stand in the breach when danger came. Ada studied his face in the firelight, saw the scars etched there, the grief buried deep, and something within her chest softened, though she gave no sign. Nayeli leaned against her, whispering that single word of prayer again, but this time it carried not only fear but the faint seed of faith. At dawn the storm broke. Clouds thinned, rain eased, and a pale light bled across the sodden land. The stranger gathered his things with a scowl, knife sheathed, rifle slung. At the door, he turned, his eyes narrowing, his grin returning like a wound reopened. "This ain't done," he said. "I'll be back." Samuel met his gaze, unblinking, rifle still close. He said nothing, for nothing more needed to be spoken. The stranger spat into the mud and rode off, swallowed by the fading storm. Silence filled the house, deeper now but different. It was no longer the silence of strangers bound by chance. It was the silence of those who had stood on the edge of harm and remained whole. The fire crackled, weak but steady. The shawl still hung by the door. The rocking chair still swayed faintly with Samuel's weight. And though the threat was not gone, though shadows still lingered, something had shifted. The sisters looked upon Samuel and saw not a captor, but a protector. Trust, fragile as firelight, had begun to burn. The storm had left the land washed clean, though scarred. Gullies cut deep through the pasture where water had torn its path. Trees leaned heavy, stripped of weaker branches, their roots clutching hard at the soil. The air smelled of damp earth, sharp and fresh as though the world had been bruised but not broken. Samuel walked the fence line at first light, hammer in hand, mending where posts had given way. Ada and Nayeli followed, not from command but from quiet choice. They carried tools, fetched nails, steadied boards when he lifted them into place. The work was simple, rhythmic. Sweat and breath mingled with the scent of pine, the thud of hammer, blows, the creak of rope. The sisters did not speak much, but Samuel felt their presence at his side differently now. The memory of the knife, the weight of his rifle in his hands had altered the air between them. They did not flinch when he drew near. Nayeli, once quick to retreat behind Ada's shoulder, now handed him nails without hesitation. Ada, guarded, still, met his gaze for longer than a breath before turning back to the task. Evenings grew gentler. The fire burned warmer, its glow filling corners once left to shadow. Samuel began teaching Nayeli how to handle the mare that had gone unused since his wife's passing. Her laughter, soft, uncertain at first, rose one morning when the horse nuzzled her shoulder. It startled him, for laughter had not lived on this land in many years. Ada watched from the fence, her expression unreadable, though her eyes followed, the scene with something between relief and ache. At night, Ada shared old songs, her voice low but steady, words in Apache rolling like wind through tall grass. Samuel sat in the rocker, listening as if the language itself might heal cracks within him. Nayeli hummed along, sometimes falling asleep near the fire, her braid loose across her shoulder. Ada's hands were deft, steadying the rhythm of each verse as though weaving memory into sound. The house, once suffocating in its grief, now pulsed faintly with life. Yet danger did not vanish with the storm. The stranger's parting words clung to them like thunder rumbling beyond the horizon, unseen but certain. Samuel cleaned his rifle each night, the metal gleaming in firelight, a ritual both of readiness and remembrance. He found himself glancing, often at the door, listening for hooves in the distance, though none came. The deeper storm was within. Samuel carried guilt like a stone in his chest. His wife's shawl still hung near the door. Her chair still creaked when he sat in it. To feel the stirrings of companionship again, to notice the way Ada's eyes lingered or the way Nayeli laughed, It was both balm and wound. He had sworn his heart to the grave, yet the house itself seemed to urge him toward the living. He wrestled, silently, nights spent staring into embers until they collapsed into ash. Ada, too, felt the pull of contradiction. When her hands brushed the shawl Samuel had repaired and left for her, warmth ran through her fingers unbidden. It was not just cloth. It was the care of a man who had seen her dignity stripped and returned a fragment of it. She caught herself, watching him when he worked, the steadiness of his posture, the patience of his silence. Yet every glance carried the ghost of her husband. Every flicker of warmth threatened betrayal to his memory. She grieved and lived at once, her heart stretched between ashes and embers. Naili, less burdened by years, saw things more plainly. She saw the way Samuel's shoulders eased when Ada sang. She saw how Ada's hands lingered over the shawl longer than needful. She saw how Samuel's eyes softened when he watched them by the fire. To her, it was like watching a tree that had weathered drought begin to green again, hesitant but alive. She said nothing, but hope settled in her like a seed. The ranch itself reflected the change. Where shutters once hung loose, they were now mended. Where tools lay scattered, they were hung in order. The hearth was swept, meals were shared at. The table rather than eaten alone. What had been only walls and silence grew into a place that bore the shape of family, though no word for it was spoken. One evening, as dusk bled violet across the horizon, Samuel brought the mare again for Naili to ride. Ada stood nearby, arms folded against the chill, watching. Naili climbed into the saddle, Samuel steadying her with a hand at her back. She grinned when the horse moved forward, clumsy but eager, and for a moment, her joy lit the field brighter than the fading sun. Ada looked on, and when Samuel turned, their eyes met. Something passed between them, unspoken, fragile yet undeniable. It was not possession, not command, but recognition. Two people scarred by loss, standing on the same ground of survival. Ada's breath caught, and she turned away quickly, but her hand lingered on the shawl draped across her shoulders as though it tethered her. That night, Ada sang longer by the fire. Samuel listened, his gaze fixed on the flames, yet his heart measured each note like steps across a bridge he had thought long broken. Naili drifted to sleep, and for a brief hour the world outside seemed to vanish, leaving only the warmth of voices, the glow of fire, and the rhythm of breath in unison. The fire burned between them, dangerous, tender, necessary. It was warmth against loneliness, light against shadows. None dared name it. Yet in the silence that followed each song, in the pause before Samuel banked the fire for the night, in the way Ada's hand lingered on the repaired shawl, the truth lived quietly, waiting to be claimed. The stranger's shadow remained, a promise of reckoning yet to come. But for now, within these walls, they had found a fragile reprieve. The ranch, once only a tomb of memory, had become a place of hesitant life. The fire between them did not consume. It glowed, steady and patient, like the ember of something long buried, stirring itself awake. The days after the storm fell into uneasy quiet, though the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Samuel sensed it first, an absence in the horizon too complete, the prairie birds falling silent before dusk, the restless shifting of cattle uneasy. At night, he began rising earlier, saddling his horse before the sun crested the ridge, riding the line of hills to study for signs. Each dawn returned him with the same answer. The storm had passed, but danger had not. It came one evening in the brittle hush before twilight, when the horizon bruised itself into violet and red. The riders appeared like shadows dragged from the earth, 5 of them, dust rising under hooves. At their head rode the stranger, hat low, eyes sharp with hunger and claim. His voice carried across the dry field, sharp as a whip. "You got something of mine, Carver." Samuel stood before the house, rifle steady across his arms, boots planted in the dust. Behind him, the door remained open, Ada and Naili framed in its glow, the hearthlight catching their braids. No answer passed Samuel's lips, only the set of his jaw, the silence of a man who had endured enough grief to know what must be done. The stranger spat into the dirt, lifting his hand. The riders fanned outward, circling, voices jeering, laughter edged with cruelty. Ada's breath quickened, but her shoulders held firm. Nayeli clutched her sister's hand, then let go, stepping to the window where her gaze met Samuel's back. Something stronger than fear rose in her chest. The first shot cracked, tearing through the evening stillness. Samuel's rifle answered, its echo rolling across the plains like thunder. Dust leapt from hooves, shouts split the air, and the ranch became the stage of reckoning. The sisters did not cower. Ada seized the old revolver Samuel had left by the door, her hand steady though her pulse roared. She fired once, the bullet striking near a rider's boot, scattering his horse. Nayeli, armed with nothing but a length of wood by the hearth, stood guard at her sister's side, ready to swing if the door gave way. Fear lived in them, yes, but it no longer ruled them. Samuel moved with grim resolve, each shot measured, not wasteful. He knew the land, the cover, the way shadows bent. His body carried old scars, but his spirit stood unbroken. The stranger's men pressed hard, circling, shouting promises of blood. But one fell with a cry into the dust, another reeled as his horse carried him limping away. The fight was sharp, violent, but swift, like a storm breaking against stone. At last only the stranger remained, his hat lost, his face twisted with rage. He spurred his horse forward, rifle raised, eyes burning not with need but with hatred of being denied. Samuel's shot split the air, striking true, not into flesh, but into the dirt at the animal's feet. The horse reared, throwing the man hard into the dust. His weapon clattered from his grasp. Samuel strode forward, rifle still steady, though his face bore the weight of a man who had no joy in victory. The stranger scrambled, curses tearing from his throat, but when his eyes lifted, they met a silence more final than any bullet. Samuel did not fire again. He merely stood, and in that steadiness was a judgment more cutting than death. The man staggered to his feet, clutching his side, rage spilling into the air like blood. But when he saw the sisters in the doorway, Ada with revolver in hand, Nayeli with fire in her eyes, something broke in him. He spat once, then turned, stumbling to his horse. His mount carried him limping into the dusk, his riders long scattered. The horizon swallowed them whole. Silence fell heavy in the aftermath. The smell of gunpowder lingered, sharp and metallic, mixing with the dust of trampled earth. Samuel lowered his rifle, breath ragged. He turned slowly to the house where Ada still held the revolver, her hand trembling only now that the danger had passed. Nayeli's wooden staff clattered from her fingers, her body folding into relief. No words were spoken, none were needed. In the glow of the hearth behind them, in the quiet figure of Samuel standing before them, the truth was clear. They had not merely survived, they had defended what was theirs to keep. Dignity, long denied, had been reclaimed. Later, when the stars burned sharp against the black, Samuel saddled his horse. He brought another from the corral, brushing the dust from its coat, tightening the cinch with care. Ada stepped forward, shawl drawn close, her eyes watching him with questions she did not speak. Samuel's voice was low, steady, the words carrying the weight of decision. "I'll take you home." Home. Not chains, not silence, not the narrow place carved by others' cruelty. Whether it was the wide plains, the shelter of the mountains, or the quiet walls of his own ranch, the word itself was no longer prison, but promise. Ada's eyes softened, though she said nothing. Nayeli smiled faintly, her braid loose in the night wind, her spirit lighter than it had been in years. They mounted together, the leather creaking, the horses shifting beneath them. The horizon held the first pale light of dawn. They rode into it, the land stretching vast and unbroken, each breath carrying the scent of sage and rain-washed earth. Ada's shawl wrapped against the chill. Nayeli's laughter rose once more as the horses quickened their pace. Samuel rode at their side, silent, steady. His presence no longer shadowed by solitude but bound in quiet fellowship. No promises passed between them, no vows spoken. Only the truth that healing was possible, that dignity once shattered could be pieced together, and that second chances did not come with fanfare but with the sound of hooves against soil and the breath of 3 souls who had chosen to endure. Ranch lay behind them, battered but unbroken. Ahead stretched the long road home, wherever home might be found.